Good evening, everyone. My name is Denise Grist, and on behalf of Atrium Innovations, I welcome you to this evening's webinar on UNDAnumber Compound Series, session number 2 with Dr. Dixon Tom. The audio portion of this webinar is now available via Voice over IP, VoIP, or teleconference. Turn up your speakers when joining the webinar, as default audio option is via OIP. To join via teleconference, please use the phone number and passcode displayed on your screen. The lines will be muted in order to facilitate a smooth flow. Therefore, questions will be submitted via the question and answer panel only, and this is the only forum for questioning this evening. Before passing the call to Dr. Tom, I'd like to encourage you to take advantage of the discount of 15% off on all of our UNDAnumbers, valid until June 8th. It can be used up to 4 times, and the promo code is UNDA20 and qualifies for free shipping. I would also like to highlight a few aspects of our 2020 education program. Firstly, this webinar is part of a 7-part UNDA series. If you've not already done so, please register for the remaining sessions. If you've already registered, you will receive a reminder email from WebEx the Friday before the live event. I'd also like you to be aware that Dr. Nigel Plummer will be conducting an evening intensive on the integrative effects of probiotics on the whole body health, emerging evidence on mechanisms, and the following dates and locations are Barrie, April 16th, and Ottawa, April 14th. This is a great evening intensive with new information on the most updated information on probiotics and the human microbiome. If you haven't had a chance to watch Dr. Plummer in the past, please come out and see him. If you've seen him, you know what a great conference he puts on, and this will be most updated information, so please come on out and see him. Also, he will be doing this evening intensive in Calgary, Alberta on September 23rd. Also, we're having a one-day intensive. It's with Dr. Samuel Yannick and Dr. Nigel Plummer. So they're doing a collaborative one-day event. It's going to be in Toronto, April 18th, and Vancouver, September 26th, on functional immunology, unraveling inflammatory and autoimmune dysfunctions, including new microbiome research. I would now like to once again introduce you to Dr. Dixon Tom. Dr. Tom is one of the founders and medical directors of the American Center for Biological Medicine and the American Center for Alternative Medicine in Scottsdale, Arizona. He is a graduate of University of Toronto Dentistry in 1974, the Ontario College of Naturopathic Medicine in Toronto, ND, in 1989, and has been practicing for over 40 years with a primary focus on management of chronic disease, including autoimmune disease, neurological conditions, gastrointestinal health, and endocrine disorders. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Dixon Tom.
Thank you, Denise. Good evening again, everyone. This, of course, as we just heard, is session 2 of 7, and I want to just back up to a couple of weeks ago and reiterate the importance of that first session. Hopefully you attended, and not only did you attend, but you also had the opportunity to listen to it again as it has come out on recording. The basis of UNDAnumbers, the basis of drainage therapeutics, really is a different approach to natural medicine than most people have been familiar with. Many people, certainly the general public, sort of think natural medicine means instead of using a prescription medication or doing surgery, you use an herbal medicine or perhaps a homeopathic medicine, or you get acupuncture, you know, that type of thing, which are all true. However, when you get into drainage, we're into another arm of really treatment that is extremely viable, and as we'll see in a sec, is an important aspect of supporting your patients. I want to reiterate again that UNDA numbers, which we'll get into in a lot of detail this evening, are not about treating any diseases, even though, you know, this evening when we talk about different systems, there are certain things that will come up, of course, but we don't use UNDA numbers to treat diseases. We use UNDA numbers to treat organ systems, as we'll keep reiterating over and over and over again. So drainage, as we mentioned last time, is the sum total of all therapies, not just UNDA numbers, not just chemotherapies, tissue salts, organotherapies, phytogens, et cetera, but it's everything. Acupuncture is a part of drainage, hands-on, Reiki, Qigong, yoga, every therapy like that contributes to drainage, because what drainage is effectively trying to do is to eliminate the natural toxins that our body is exposed to that have an impact vivitating this organism, and thus require some degree of management. That, of course, was written by Maury in the 50s and then translated by Marc Clement in the 60s, who was a British homeopath. On slide 5 is two very important homeopaths who basically, as you see, lived were born in the late 1800s and died in some cases in the 50s and 60s, so 50 years ago. And the reason I mention Vanier and Nebel is because those two gentlemen were very instrumental over 100 years ago in the initial formulations and the whole concept of how UNDA numbers basically came about. They utilized the work from Lux, who was a veterinarian back in the early 1800s. Lux used organ therapies to treat animals and found that there was a positive impact on that. Homeopathy, of course, was big in the day, with Hahnemann, writing his the Organon, and 1822 was the first. So these two gentlemen, in addition to a third gentleman, Rui, are really the three gentlemen who are responsible for the formulations, as we'll start to talk about in the UNDA numbers themselves. So Nebel, and the other thing about Nebel, you see 1870 to 1954. Nebel is the homeopath who basically coined the word tuberculonism, which you are well aware, if you are, hopefully, that is one of the miasmatic things that Hahnemann talked about, although Hahnemann never named it tuberculonism because of the fact that it was kind of a new thing in the day. He called it pseudosora, Hahnemann did, but it was Nebel who actually coined the word tuberculonism back in the day. So drainage therapies homeopathically follow the law of similitude and the action of the infinitesimal dose. And you see that was published 108 years ago. So, one of the aspects that I've heard in my in the last 25 years of using UNDA numbers, especially by, we'll say, classical homeopaths, was that it's not homeopathy. And whether we call it homeopathy or whatever you want to call it, energy medicine, if that's a preferred term, it does follow the law of similitude, the meaning that it's a single energetic compound, even though when we get into the formulas, you see that there's a number of remedies that are in there. Published by Dr. Joe in 2008, it's a great book. You see organotherapy, drainage, and detoxification. I highly recommend that you search that book down. I have had it for many years, probably the last 12 years. I probably bought it on Amazon. I don't remember, but obviously it's available. And in fact, one of my patients is in New Zealand right now doing a cranial sacral course, and she sent me a picture with herself and Dr. Joe, who was also taking the cranial. Dr. Joe is a medical doctor who trained in Belgium back in the early 70s. He practiced in Europe for a while, then he went to Canada. He practiced in Calgary for a number of years, and of course now he is in New Zealand. So what he established, and what he in the book, the organotherapy, drainage, and detox, you know, the whole idea of the utilization of oligotherapies, lithotherapy, which is gemstones, gemotherapy, which of course are the buds, and the combination of remedies, and in addition to well-established detox remedies that we're familiar with, they have proven now over 100 years to clinically enhance the effectiveness of other therapies that practitioners had been doing forever, whether it's acupuncture or single remedy homeopathics. So as he states, many classical homeopaths claim that the simillimum is its own draining remedy, which is true, because that is in fact what Hahnemann did. As I mentioned last time, if you were to go to Stuttgart in German and can read German, you will see that in many of Hahnemann's cases, he used 3 remedies to start many of his cases, and then once he established a patient, he often used 4 remedies within one day. The initial remedies that he almost always used ended up being what we call drainage remedies. So it is true. The simillimum, which the UNDA numbers are a simillimum, so it establishes there's no contradiction to use UNDA numbers and a single remedy. And whether we call it Hahnemannian homeopathy, if one doesn't understand that principle, then they say that there is a conflict. But having used them now, and of course Dr. Guinot, my mentor, who used them many years before I did, and showed me how he would use single remedies along with the UNDA numbers with great clinical effectiveness. So it's an important aspect to consider. If we go back even farther, we go back into the 1800s. This is just a way of breaking down that I'm assuming many of you use some, unlikely all, but a good number of these types of things, and they've sort of been divided into, first of all, the elementary remedies, which for all intents and purposes are the remedies that can be utilized for everyone. Doesn't matter what their presenting complaint is, whether they are, a baby who's just born, or somebody in middle age, or somebody who has some type of a chronic ongoing ailment. Elementary remedies are never going to be contraindicated, and it's always interesting. You go back and read some of the therapies, and if you have any of the old books, and I also felt in my first go about in naturopathic school way back when, 35 years ago, that what I felt were my best textbooks were textbooks written between 1910 and 1930. Because they didn't have antibiotics, they didn't have drugs, they basically used electricity, they used magnetism, they used those types of things, which were very popular during the 1800s. And there's somewhat of a comeback coming, of course, because there's now a much greater appreciation of how energetic therapies have such a dramatic impact on the body, on healing, et cetera. Then, of course, pretty much everybody, all of us here on the call and all of us who practice medicine in some form, use some form of biochemical remedies, including what we recommend people eat, herbal medicine, enzymes, vitamins, minerals, chelation therapy, et cetera. But there's also hands-on medicine, which includes movement. I talked about functional movement last time, where you do an activity, you stop the activity, you should be able to repeat the activity within 10 minutes. If you can't, you've overstretched your physiologic limits. You should back off till you can repeat it, and then gradually increase your stamina and increase the ability to do the activity. But structural integration, AKA from a chiropractic perspective, they'll call it manipulation, subluxation, which probably is really not a real word. But any type of body work, Reiki, as I said, Tai Chi, massage work, colon hydrotherapy, et cetera. Then, of course, we come into the field where energetic medicine that I mentioned last time, without having some armamentarium of energetic medicine, I personally, and it's my philosophical belief, that you'll never be able to allow, at least I've never been able to, maybe you can, but I was never able to, allow a patient to reach what we prefer to call their optimal performance, and no matter what their presenting issues are on any level. So obviously homeopathy, AKA UNDA numbers in this particular case. I'm also a huge fan of flower remedies. In fact, I've often said if there was only one remedy on the planet, my preference would be a flower remedy, because You know, I know we're not just talking about the 38 Bach flower remedies. There's flower remedy companies all over the world that are sort of local. If you're in Australia, you use the bush remedies. If you're in Alaska, you use the Alaska remedies. If you're on the West Coast like I am, we use more West Coast remedies, and I know there's remedies on the East Coast also, et cetera. But let's not forget about the importance of prayer, meditation, which now should hopefully be part of, you know, your recommendation that you give to everybody. You know, we live in a very sympathetic dominant world. Excuse me. And the whole idea of meditation is to take people out of their chronic sympathetic dominant state and at least put them into parasympathetic part of the time. And they don't have to go into, you know, formal meditation, but you can basically go for a 2-minute walk and basically try and clear your mind. So positive thinking prayer becomes an important aspect of the, you know, of all these. So what's now important is, so we have all these different remedies. When and where and why would we use them? So I think it's important. If you haven't seen this, once again, a lot of this is initially presented to me by Dr. Guinil. I've changed some of the words. I've sort of modified it to my own style. And so what's really evident and is now, I think, much more widely accepted than even 25 and 30 years ago when I sort of ventured into this approach to medicine, is that every single, any patient who comes to you with any type of a chief concern, the problem started energetically. And now, of course, since 2005, when we talked about last time the whole idea of epigenetics, we know that epigenetics goes back generations. One for sure, animal studies show it goes back 80 generations, so we can assume in humans it goes back many. I don't remember if I mentioned last time, but some of you potentially have patients who were in the Holocaust, you know, either grew up or children have survived. They're now, you know, well into their 80s and 90s, and you know, they've had children and grandchildren, and in some cases great-grandchildren. And you can see what's passed down because of the trauma that occurred during that terrific time in the world's history. So once the body moves out of an energetic imbalance, it moves into what we're referring to as a functional problem. The most commonly diagnosed functional problem in medicine is irritable bowel. Now they call it IBD-C for constipation, or IBS, excuse me, or IBSD for diarrhea. And the reason we call it functional is because if you do blood tests, if you take a picture, if you do a physical exam, there's nothing from the perspective to say, well, I don't see anything wrong. We could do a colonoscopy and say it looks fine in there. You may have a little bit of inflammation, maybe it's a diet type thing. And it's not until we get into the physical problem, which we talked about last time, is actually adaptive physiology, which comes into the aspect of, you know, there's actual pathology. So you can take a picture, you can do a blood test, and, you know, we know that blood tests, the way the labs set them up, only if you're on the bottom 2.5% or on the top 2.5%, so out of 100 people, just randomly done, if you, for whatever you're testing, only 5 of those, 5% of the 5 out of the 100 people will show any abnormality, no matter how imbalanced they are energetically or functional, and even if they're having a physical issue. So then we have to look at where do the remedies, the biotherapeutic remedies that we're talking about, where are they the most active and when are they potentially the most effective? So, of course, many of our clients, many of our patients come to us already with some form of a physical ailment. It's not saying that they all do, because we obviously get lots of patients with functional issues also that are an issue and a problem. But we look on the slide, on slide 10, you know, this is where, so if somebody is having, you know, pretty significant, you know, issues, and labs and imaging and PE are telling you something, in addition to changing their diet, they probably will benefit by doing some form of a nutraceutical, whether it's a vitamin mineral or an herbal medicine They will benefit from doing some form of hands-on therapy. Detox therapy becomes a good thing, you know, manipulation, structural integration, IV therapy is well indicated. And of course, this is a place where bioidentical hormones may well be supportive of these people. And you see, of course, on the right, this is where UNDAnumbers come into play, because UNDAnumbers have an incredible positive impact on people who have imbalances on any level in the physical plane. As we move up the scale, we see the UNDAnumbers via the metals have a pretty significant impact on the idea of functional disorder. Once again, whether it's irritable bowel or, you know, any other issue where the patient has a very definite complaint, but we don't see anything on our typical evaluations. But in addition to UNDAnumbers, of course, we could be using illegal therapies, chemotherapies, and organotherapies. Why? Because we're getting more into this truly energetic realm of things. And so if once we're into a functional area, you start finding that, you know, patients who get IV therapy may say, I don't really notice much. They do bioidentical hormones and they say, I don't really notice much. And it's like, no, nothing's happening. It's because that's not the level of where the imbalance is. The level, it's already, you know, we got to push up higher into the true energetic imbalance, and what we talked about last time is recreating homeostasis, or more appropriately, recreating the homeodynamics within the individual. And then, of course, at the top of this inverted triangle are all different types of energetic therapies. And once again, here we have the UNDAnumbers. And the UNDAnumbers work on this level because UNDAnumbers have the ability to very significantly impact the terrain. We talked about the terrain as being miasm, temperament, and constitution, which by itself is a whole you know, course of study, but becomes a very important aspect. And when you start to understand the idea of terrain, when you start to understand the idea of miasm, it becomes much easier to be able to predict what the patient and why the patient is experiencing their particular issues. And it gives us a much better clue as to what would be the best therapeutic approach for any individual, depending what their concern is. So, of course, up in this energetic, and this, of course, the way that I laid that out is totally my bias. That's why you see the very top of that is flower remedies. As I said, if I only had one remedy in the world to use, I would use those because they treat energetic, and everything at the top can treat functional and physical problems. But everything at the bottom doesn't do such a good job of treating things strictly at an energetic level. So that's why acupuncture and prayer and chakra work and color and music and UNDAnumbers and single remedies have such a dramatic impact for our clientele, far beyond just saying, oh, we'll give you a Myers cocktail, Myers IV, which will give you a bit of a boost, or we'll do a B complex B12 shot, which will give you a little bit of energy, but it's not lasting. And if the problem is not at a physical level, but rather energetic, those won't even buy you much time, unfortunately. So we look at UNDAnumbers, which is that will be the rest of the discussion for all the talks. But I want to remind you to go back and listen to what we talked about last time, because it's the basis of why UNDAnumbers are really so effective. So the company UNDA, and it's the word UNDA, it simply means undulating wave. There's a company in Arzay, which is where their facility is. It's in Arzay, Belgium. They have a sort of a head office, if you like, in Brussels, which is about 60 miles or 110 kilometers or so apart. And they literally drive back and forth 3 or 4 times a day delivering remedies. So in Belgium, UNDA is the largest homeopathic brand available. One thing in Europe, not just in Belgium, but homeopathics are considered pharmaceuticals. They're not. They have the same standards that the making of any drug manufacturer does. So they are world-renowned for their quality, their effectiveness of their products. They've been around for a long time. In fact, the company itself was structured or formulated only in 1949, even though the remedies were first studied starting in the 19-teens, just around the First World War, which we'll talk about in a sec. So there's a large number of metals, there's a large number of plants, and occasionally we get a couple of other things. We have CP in one of the remedies, we have APIS in one of the remedies, but for all intents and purposes, 99% of what's in an UNDA number is either a GMO-free plant or a mineral. That's under incredibly strict standards. The products are thoroughly tested to verify that they're free of microbes and mycotoxins and pesticides and heavy metals. In fact, the making of an UNDA number goes through 7 different stages of testing, and after each stage, it's tested for a number of different things, not only for what's listed there. So the company UNDA, because they wanted their products to be pure, actually developed their own ways of doing laboratory analysis in order to confirm that they have appropriate concentrations of ingredients that are present in their products. How do they do that? They basically use above most standards of how they evaluate things. So as we see, they use a column chromatography, where the plants, and mind you, I haven't been to UNDA, and I don't know if the botanist, the herbalist who was there at the 3 times I was there, who had been in, herbal medicine forever. He was incredibly, he had a mind and the ability to identify a plant. We could give him a piece of a plant about the size of your fingernail, and he'd look at it, he'd put it under the microscope, and he'd be able to tell me what the plant was, just from that small piece of it. He truly was an amazing gentleman. And so every plant that comes into the facility goes into his lab first, and they verify that it's free, and they verify that they should proceed with using that particular plant. And even when I was there numerous times, they would reject an entire shipment because it wasn't perfect or there was an issue with it, and they would just not have it. And sometimes we'll get into a place where we don't have an UNDA number and say, how do we not have an UNDA number? Why aren't they making it? The reason they sometimes don't have it is because they're harvesting of their herbs. And just, by the way, Arzay is at the same longitude latitude as Hahnemann was in Germany, where he basically made his main remedies. It's one of the reasons that the facility is there, from a climate perspective and from just the aspects of similar aspects of what Hahnemann was doing when he was making single remedies. So these remedies, the herbs come in, they're tested. They go through the first stage, they're retested, they go through another stage, they're tested. So they're constantly being evaluated on each step of the process itself. They also use infrared spectrometry. They also use fluorometry for the final products in solution. That's how they've been able to verify. And, when I was there, as I said, the company was technically formulated in 1949. And I remember them showing me, they have samples from virtually every year. I don't know if they still have them, but I remember looking at spectrophotometry of UNDA-243 that was made in 1943. So they actually look, not 1953. So what they do is they compare to, does the, UNDA-243 that's made in 2020, does it look exactly like the remedy that they had in 1953? And if it doesn't, they reject it. So it's a truly quality control. I can't emphasize enough, which always amazes me how they can even sell the UNDA numbers for whatever they are as inexpensive, knowing the amount of analysis that goes into it and how often they'll reject a whole batch simply because there's something wrong with that. Another thing that's not on this slide, but you may be able to see this, which is one of the things that I got. This is Kirlian photography. of the energies of numerous different single homeopathic remedies. And so we have that, and this one here is of belladonna. So it shows you that, the different potencies have a different energetic imprint. And I don't have one, but you could do this type of photography of an UNDA number, for example, and one of the things that we'll get to is the way that the remedies are formulated. If you were to do a Kirlian photograph of it and you didn't combine the remedies in the proper order, it wouldn't look like it's supposed to, which is why we know that the exact remedy that you'll get in 2020 is the same remedy that you would have got in 2015, and it'll be the same remedy that you will get in 2025. It's because the meticulousness of their analysis is is incredibly significant. So we're going to talk about the UNDA number compounds. So the UNDA numbers themselves, as again, for the most part, are basically made of plants. Plants that are diluted, for the most part, probably about a 4x, which means that for those of you, especially with sensitive taste buds, there's still technically a few molecules of the herb in the remedy. And some people will report to you, they said, oh, I don't like the taste of that one, or how can they taste different? These are homeopathic, do they have any taste? And what you're tasting, the difference is the taste of the different plants. And depending on your own taste buds, some patients, oh, I love that remedy, and some patients, man, I don't like that remedy. And it's not that the remedy is good or bad for you. If you like the taste, it's good, and if you don't like the taste, it's bad. No, it's because of the herb that's in there. So we have a plant that is not just, you don't take the plant, you take the metal and just stick them together. That's not how the remedies are made. But these two things are combined in a very specific order and a very specific way so that they have a specific impact on specific organ systems. Once again, we're not treating diseases, we're treating organ systems. and we're dealing with metabolic functions. And they're working at a cellular level to facilitate the among trees, to facilitate drainage of the physiologic processes, the millions of them that are going on every instant within the body. So these remedies, the plant itself, through the eclecticism of the, in the 1850s, who basically looked at, the doctrine of signatures for plants. So there's an organotropic effect from the plant, and what it does, it's literally drawing the metal to the site, specifically to the organ system that we're trying to support. And this is truly on an energetic level. So we're looking at, we talked about it last time, in both intracellular and extracellular. Remember, we want the intracellular is, not that the extracellular isn't important, the intracellular is where the action happens. It's where all your organelles are, it's where you make all your energy, it's where you make your hormones, et cetera, et cetera. And then the waste products are dumped into the extracellular space, ultimately to be moved through the lymphatic system and out of the body through the among trees. So each individual UNDA number has a unique fingerprint. So it's not like there's a bunch of remedies stuck together. It's a single energetic complex, which, as I said, would end up showing up like that if we were to take a Kirlian photograph or a Kirlian picture of each of the UNDA numbers. And the concept of how all this happened is through the aspect of the studies that were done by the two Nebel and Rui, as I said earlier, and Vanier. And so why did the UNDA numbers come about? Like, what was, what were they looking for? We knew that those of you who know Rudolf Steiner basically was responsible for the whole idea of anthroposophical medicine, in the late 1800s into the early 1900s. They took that knowledge. They took Hahnemann's idea of miasms. There was already study done on oligotherapy, which are, working on enzymes. Chinese medicine was certainly known about meridians, channels, energy, and of course, homeopathy had been around for 100 years by that point in time. So what were they looking to do with making an UNDA number? So if you will remember, one of the greatest challenges in the 1800s, health-wise for people, was tuberculosis, excuse me. And in fact, about 25% of the European population at one point or other developed tuberculosis. There was no treatment at that point. They didn't know what to do for patients with that. They basically isolated them, put them, away from the idea. It's sort of like the coronavirus is happening right now. Well, that's TB in 1890. So what these three docs did, they said, we got to figure out a way using drainage to try and see if we can come up with a better way to manage tuberculosis, which, as I said, killed 25% of the European population back in the 1800s. So we have the UNDA number itself, which, it comes in a little bottle like this, is this integration of a plant, several plants, that are mostly in a 4 to 6x dilution, which, X versus C, plus they use a pure metal, which is a 12x dilution, and alcohol. Now, many of you will be familiar with the idea that if you have an herbal tincture, somebody says, I don't want to tolerate alcohol, I'll just evaporate the alcohol. Well, if you do that with an UNDA number, you don't have an UNDA number. There's nothing left because the plant, the energy of the plant and the energy of the metal are actually implanted into the alcohol. So if you evaporate the alcohol, there's no energy left. You basically are taking nothing. You're not going to get any impact. So the alcohol, as is used in Chinese medicine, is a way to circulate the qi and the blood. So we have the plant, the metal, and the alcohol. You can't leave out any one of them or you don't have an UNDA number. So people will say, well, what do I do with people who have, who are an AA, or perhaps they're alcoholic, perhaps they're on the liver transplant list, and have been told by their physicians or whatever to say you can't consume any alcohol. I mean, can a person who goes to AA meetings every day consume UNDA numbers? So all I can tell you is from my personal experience. I have lots and have had lots of patients who literally go to AA 5 times a week and take out UNDA numbers without a problem. The problem with, this is my opinion, with that type of addiction is not the alcohol. It's the reason they're alcoholic, and that's what the UNDA numbers have the ability to treat. We're not saying, oh, you have to avoid alcohol because it's going to make you want to drink alcohol. No, just the opposite. The use of UNDA numbers that I've used successfully, and I said done more than dozens, hundreds, because it's such a common problem in our society. So anytime a person says that, and they basically, I'll tell them what I just said to you, and I said, then if we can't do that, then we'll have to use other forms of therapy, which is not the end of the world, but unfortunately you're going to be missing an important aspect of, what we're ultimately going to do. As I mentioned a minute ago, the plants are organotrophic, and they, for all intents and purposes, they get drawn to they pull a pure metal. Pure metal means it's not a salt, it's a pure metal to, whether it's going to the liver or the colon or the brain or the heart or the lung or, your big toe, it is a unique energetic complex. And once again, if I had a Kirlian picture of it, I could show you it's just like single remedies have unique remedies in different potencies. UNDA numbers have a unique energetic complex also. So let's look at the metals themselves, some of the functions of the pure metals. One of the first metal we'll talk about is gold. And one of the reasons that gold is important is because gold is important in all terrains. It's important in literally in every organ, in every tissue. People say gold. I mean, the only time gold has been used in medicine that I'm aware of is years ago, perhaps with your grandfathers or great-grandfathers, where they used them for arthritis as a standard treatment. What it does is it supports the cell nucleus. It supports the core of the cell. It's not the brain, because we know the cell membrane is the real brain. So it is important in the DNA and RNA processes. Copper, these are pure metals again. Copper is utilized in the UNDA numbers to support issues regarding the hemopoietic systems. It is part of hemoglobin. It helps regulate hepatic function. Excuse me, hepatic function. So it'll be important in some of the liver remedies we'll talk about here shortly. Important in the immune function, making antibodies, et cetera, et cetera. So immune-type remedies will often have copper in them. In fact, one of the treatments that you can use for acute is using oligotherapy in a little vial, gammadine copper, and using one ampule 3 times a day for 3 days during whatever acute episode that you're doing. Silver, we now, I mean, it's pretty common now where you probably all use colloidal silver in some form for any type of an anti-infective, a problem. Years ago, of course, when dimes had real silver in, farmers used to throw a bunch of dimes in their well, and that's how they basically would keep their well from having overgrowing bacteria and things. So it is anti-infectious. It's interesting that they figured out that aluminum was a support for the nervous system long before they talk about Alzheimer's and the idea that, the whole idea that you have these plaques and things in the brain that, oh, it was aluminum exposure, and it's like, okay, probably it's not that. In fact, aluminum is an incredibly important aspect in helping with the intellectual functions that people have. Lead. We talk about lead poisoning. I don't get it here in my water bill in Phoenix, but when I lived in Portland for 27 years, every time we got a water bill, there was always a blurb on lead and the fact that lead pipes, solder, and that type of things in very old systems, there could be easily lead leaching into the water. Lead is typically used in the UNDAnumbers that have some of the most profound cellular toxicity, some of the more severely chronic conditions that you'll end up seeing. Stannum or tin and antimony are pretty commonly used in remedies, as we'll see, that for the dealing with the respiratory system as from that perspective of things. So what is the action of the UNDAnumbers? They optimize the function of moving things towards the emunctories. They allow the intracellular toxins to be moved into the extracellular space. They're basically able to support the different endocrine organs by constantly, on low dose, repeating those. This is a slow way of, remember, we're not trying to exceed physiologic limits. We're not trying to blast things out of it, cause some type of, they used to call healing crises. Since I started using UNDAnumbers, I never really believed in a healing crisis, and as Dr. Guinaud taught me, all he said is all you're doing is exceeding physiologic limits if you get to that point, and we just back it off and we allow the body to eliminate the speed that it's capable of. And of course, the UNDAnumbers, as I said, can have a very profound effect on the terrain itself. So there's these 5 stages that we call in drainage. The cellular stage, the intracellular toxins that are literally a component of the normal function within the cell. And 2 of the UNDAnumbers that typically are useful in that particular process when you're dealing with that are UNDA1 and UNDA18, which we'll go into a little bit more detail as we go in further on this evening. The liver becomes, without any doubt, we all know that, obviously we can't live without organs, but what's interesting about the liver is that it's the only organ in our body that if we cut out half of it, it'll grow back, which gives you an idea of the importance of that because of so many functions. UNDA20 is the remedy that has a pretty profound effect on that particular organ system. In the chest, the respiratory system, we see that UNDA2 will encourage the body to eliminate, and UNDA5 is the one that's most specific for the lung itself. Sometimes if the body is not capable of breaking things down, so when there's a buildup of toxicity, the body, unfortunately, will make a toxic intermediate. As we know with phase 1, phase 2, that happens within liver detox. Sometimes the phase 2 intermediate is more problematic to the body than the initial toxin was in the first place. So we need ways to facilitate the body to break those down efficiently, and the remedies that we typically will think about in that arena will be under 15, when somebody has a fever in an acute infectious situation. Under 48 is one of the deeper remedies for the most profound levels of intoxication, usually meaning somebody is well down the road or well down the river, as I talked about last time, of toxicity. And 258 facilitates the body's ability to break down things. And then we have these general remedies just to support the general emunctories. So under 7 is for the general urinary tract, under 50 is the colon, under 27 is the lungs, under 245 is the GU, specifically the uterus and ovaries, and 270 is the skin. So, and we're going to be going through, obviously, these remedies in more detail. So I'm going to make a comment about under slide 25, and I'm going to say ignore what it says on this. And the reason that it's there is because when you pick up the box, of one of the UNDA numbers, and you read what it says, it basically says, children, anyone over 12, 10 to 30 drops 1 to 3 times daily. Don't do that. And then for acute, it says up to 12 times a day. Don't do that, because that is not, I don't know how that came to be, but it is on the box, so that's why I have to say it. But just totally ignore that from my experience and from what the 3 men, when they initially prepared the remedies, they basically, and I'll tell you my own story about how I get to the dosing. So the dosing is that first one there on slide 26. It says 5. It's 5 to 15 drops 1 to 3 times a day. Ignore that. It's 5 drops 3 times a day. If you were to go back and read the original writings of the 3 doctors who basically from the 19-teens, 20s, and then in 1936, they published in Paris, and it's in some library somewhere, in addition to in the UNDA vault, it says this is how you prescribe them. When you do acute remedies, it's 5 drops 6 times a day. So I'm just telling you what I do, because that's what the 3 docs who formulated these things 100 years ago said. Dr. Guinaud, had sometimes a variation of that. So what I have done over my 25 years is I have canaries, just like I'm sure you do, and canaries as far as patients are concerned, incredibly perceptive. So what I would do is I would take an UNDA number to one of these people. I would take the label off. I would give it to the patient and say, tell me what you feel with that. And I have about 5 of them. Those 5 people could literally say, oh, I feel that remedy in in whatever organ. And so when I had 5 of these people, I did all these different combinations, permutations of dosing. And what it came back was all 5 of them said, if you want to be the most effective using UNDA numbers, take 5 drops 3 times a day. That is what will create the most dynamic effect. So that's always what I've always recommended. I know people do all kinds of other combinations, but I can only go with my experience and what the doctors who formulated the remedies experience basically said. So people will say, well, what if I forget a dose? Well, what's interesting that works, so typically people will definitely take it in the morning when I get up, and at bedtime, because we want to take these remedies at least 10 to 15 minutes away from meals or away from food. You can drink water, but ideally you're not eating or brushing your teeth. And they say, well, when do I take I don't have time. I can't take them at work. And you don't have to take them at work. You don't have to space them out equally. It's not that. But the importance is 3 times a day. So some people say, well, I'll leave for work. I'll take them before I go to work. And then I don't come home. I go to the gym. I go to my meeting. I only come home at 9 o'clock, and I'm, getting ready for bed at 9:30. I said, take them at 9:30. Well, what if I forget? I said, take them at 10 and wait 2 minutes and take them again. So we still take them 3 times a day, 5 drops 3 times a day. That is my bias. That is what I have always prescribed in the 100,000 times I've recommended prescriptions to people. That's always been my dosing. Children, 1 to 5, depending on the situation. It can be 3 drops 3 times a day. Sometimes I'll do 5 drops twice a day. That may be a little bit of a variation, but once again, never 12 times a day. Usually with a kid, it may go up to 4 times a day. For babies, we can use different. We can use this elbow crease, and the belly button. So we're talking general. But I just had a little, 10 months old, who had the flu. Her mom said she can't sleep. She's snotty. She tried to put it on you. Said, when you have that acute, you got to give them orally. Now with a baby, what I'll do, because they basically are so reactive, I said, in that case, you can actually put the remedies in a little bit of water and use an eyedropper and just, put it in the baby's mouth. They work great. The key thing is with acute is to just repeat them. Not 12 times, up to 6 times is what I have found to be the most effective. So we have 76 UNDAnumbers, but you see they're numbered from number 1 to number 1002. Why do we have, number 1 to 1002? Because the 3 docs made 1002 formulas. They had 1002 different combinations of herbs. Now, pre the UNDA company, 1949, what these 3 docs did, they would handwrite out their formulas, and they would give it to the pharmacist and say, make this remedy. And eventually, in 1936, when they published it, they ended up publishing the top 76 remedies that they all agreed on that had the broadest brush that literally could manage every organ system. That's why we only, UNDAnumber in the company, only sells 76 remedies, but there are 1002 formulas. I did get to see 1002 formulas many, many years ago. They have the formulas, but they'll never be disclosed because they're not going to make the remedies. So you see the remedies are grouped. The first group is the organ remedies, UNDA 1 to UNDA 13. The next group are the degenerative remedies, 14, 15, 16. Then we have functional remedies between UNDA 17 and UNDA 50, and the drainage remedies are between UNDA 74 and 1002. Now, what's important to know is that all remedies up to between UNDA 1 and UNDA 50 have metals in them, with one exception, which is UNDA 23. There's no metals in UNDA 23. Why did they do that? Nobody knows. Was it just mislabeled? Should they have put it some other number? We don't know. And then, with the exception of 202, 700, and 710, the drainage remedies, there are no metals. There's plants, and occasionally sepia and apis and those types of things. So how do we prescribe these things? If you're new to this whole method, for a sake of simplicity, we pick a remedy from the first level, 1 to 13. That's our organ remedy. And then we pick a corresponding organ remedy from the 17 to 50. And then we pick a third corresponding remedy, organ remedy, for the drainage between 74 and 1002. I know I'm going to show you some exceptions to the rule, but trust me, when I started this with no information other than that's what I was told, that's what I did. And when you do it that way and start to get a feel for the UNDAnumbers, you'll really start to get a sense of how potent these remedies are, how important they are for the aspect of supporting the therapies that you're doing for any of your patients. And you'll start saying, wow, I should have started using these a long time ago. So as I continue to emphasize, UNDAnumbers are for organ systems. So your goal when you take your history, do your case taking, is to try and figure out, I'm going to sneeze, excuse me, is to figure out what organ system do we want to treat. And that's how we pick our UNDAnumbers. Not because UNDA so-and-so and so to treat the condition X, Y, or Z. That plays little relevance to what's going on. This is this is sort of my take on what Dr. Gano showed, and those of you who do acupuncture or were familiar with this. I never studied acupuncture formally or Chinese medicine formally, but we have two overlapping triangles, the blue one on the top and the green one underneath. And so we see at the bottom we have kidney, and then we have at the other apex is the GI, and then the third corner is the lung. And when we take that triangle, that blue triangle, when those organ systems have fully matured, we have the full maturation of our immune system, which happens, surprise, surprise, about age 10, not age 2 or 3, about age 10. The underlying organ systems are the endocrine system, the cardiovascular system, and the central nervous system. And then we'll see that we have specific UNDA numbers related, the organ remedies between 1 and 13 that relate to each of these organ systems. And you see they're sort of listed on slide 32 for your study program. I should mention, why are the musculoskeletal in the skin in the middle and not at one of the apexes? Is because the reality is, with virtually all exceptions, musculoskeletal problems are not a musculoskeletal source problem, with the exception of acute injury. Sprain your ankle, musculoskeletal. If you sprain your ankle 10 times, it's not musculoskeletal. It's a predisposition. It's a terrain issue. There's virtually no skin diseases, with one exception, urticaria, contact dermatitis. But virtually anything that a dermatologist would ever diagnose is really not a skin problem. They're all internal manifestations coming out on the skin because the skin is a secondary emunctory, doesn't know how to get rid of things, so it pushes it out onto the skin. Skin cancer is not a skin disease. Skin cancer is an internal problem where your primary emunctories are not efficient. So, whatever it is, that's why they're in the middle, and we'll get to a reason why we don't treat those. This is a developmental aspect of and this is when I was a professor for so many years. This is what I tried to hammer into my students and saying, if you truly understand this slide 33, you will go a long way into understanding why an individual patient develops specific health problems. That's why I believe if you do fertility issues, we have to go way back into grandparents to try and get a sense of the epigenetic components moving forward, just like I mentioned with the Holocaust survivors. So when certain things happen during our evolution, during our development, you see up to the nervous system maturation into our mid-20s, you can literally roll back time and look at types of things and think of all these as a stack of dominoes. So we have, starting with the kidney, up to 18 months, to the digestive system up to 7, the respiratory system up to puberty through our teen years, the cardiovascular are sort of the college years, and then our central nervous system maturation with the complete myelinization, basically in our 20s when we're basically after college. You can roll back time and look at things that happen to people. And so if something happened, let's say at 4 years old, and you can surmise whatever that is. If you look at that slide we talked about in session 1, where it talked about, preconception, and then the things that happen to us, in life. So let's say, you moved when you were 4, or your house burned down or something. Say, well, did that have an impact? Yeah, what happens is the domino doesn't fall down properly, which means every subsequent domino doesn't fall down at a proper time either. It's an incredibly important concept, and I found it incredibly valuable as an opportunity to allow people to start to understand why, why does one person who gets exposed to, a trigger that we talked about last time go down this row, and another person who has the same, it could be identical twins, who's exposed to the same thing but goes down this row. It's because of this underlying terrain things. So let's start talking about drainage. some of the key remedies. So this slide on number 34 basically is an opportunity to say, if I don't know where to start with any of my patients because I'm not that familiar, that's the one slide you use. Use that, get that slide up, print that page, highlight it, because I virtually guarantee every single patient, whoever you see, at some point could use 3/4 of the remedies that are on that page. We call them drainage remedies. Does it mean you have to use these to start off? No, you don't. But if you're new, that's a good idea as a place to start to get a feel for this type of thing. So using your 50% discount, this is a good set of remedies, and we'll specifically talk about, you know, the digestive and hepatic systems, which are two of the systems that come hugely into play. And we look at, you know, the whole hepatic system and think about, well, what is the liver really doing? So, you know, what's interesting about the hepatic system, you know, one of the key remedies, I'll go backwards through a slide here, a couple of slides. You see, you know, here we have UNDA-243, where it says digestive and endocrine systems, liver health. Well, the number 243, the reason it's called 243, because in the 1920s, believe it or not, they'd already figured out that the liver had 243 functions. That's why it's named 243. We now know it has probably 500 functions, maybe even more than that. That's why it's such, and every organ is important, but that's why it's such a, you can't live, obviously, without a liver. Can't live without, you know, many organs, but liver specifically, because of the fact that it's responsible for so many different functions. So we're not just talking about the liver and gallbladder that happens to be where this is happening, but it's associated with the entire hepatic portal system, which basically is intricately connected with the whole gastrointestinal digestive system, which literally starts with your lips, your teeth, swallowing, your esophagus, and then all this is innervated by the enteric nervous system overall. So the liver digestive system becomes incorporated, and you, as well as I, are pretty familiar with the fact that anybody who's coming in with, you know, any type of a chronic type of complaint, you would not go wrong in looking at their digestive/hepatic system. So this slide is even more critical. So on this slide here, theoretically, every one of your patients that you see from tomorrow on could be given 3 of these remedies. So we're picking one remedy from the systemic complex, once again, the organ remedy. We're picking a remedy from the functional complex, and we're picking a remedy from the drainage complex. We're picking 3 remedies. We take 5 drops of each 3 times a day, and when you do that, this little bottle, the UNDA number, will last between 21 and 25 days if they take 15 drops a day. If they come back and they say, I have half a bottle, half the remedy left, you automatically know they're not following your plan, because that bottle should be empty between 21 and 25 days. Why is it not all 21 days? Is because of the herbs that are in here, the surface tension of the drop makes the drops not exactly the same size. Some drops are a little bit bigger, so the bottle will finish in 21 days. Some drops are a little smaller because of surface tension, because of the herb, and will last a little bit longer. But if they're lasting 4 and 5 weeks, we're missing doses. Don't expect to get the expected results. So as a starting remedy, if you're totally unfamiliar with it, but and I want you to jump in and start trying these remedies, you're going to start with UNDA number 1. You're going to give them 5 drops 3 times a day. You're going to give them UNDA number 20, 5 drops 3 times a day, and you're going to give them UNDA 243. 1, 20, 243, safe, almost 9. I would be hard-pressed to think of a case, because that question came up in questions last time, that I would ever not do that. Or I mean, I personally don't do that anymore because I have a pretty profound knowledge of the remedies, and I don't feel I need to do that. But as you're learning the remedies, and because I have a pretty good sense of the essence of the remedies, I don't feel that I can do other things. You know, I can do my casserole packs and dry skin brushing and maybe diet, maybe I use Live Complex, maybe I'll use Live Gen, I'll use some other types of things, or whatever I feel is the most appropriate. So what we see here listed is UNDA number 1. And beside the box, you see the remedies, Milliforum, Angelica, Ursi, Equisetum, Lycopodium, Terebinthina, Valerian, and Argenticum metallicum. People say, holy moly, what kind of a combination is that? I want you to remember that that is a single energetic fingerprint. There's only one energy. And what UNDA figured out is, unless you make the remedy in the specific way that was written by the 3 docs, you will not get the right energetic complex. Initially, when I was first introduced to UNDA numbers, they didn't tell us what were in the remedies because they thought somebody would just take and mix these in a bowl and here's the remedy. But when they did it, they said you don't have the right energetic complex because it doesn't come out to what it initially looked like in 1953, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a very specific way. The remedies are not just simply, I'll put them all in a bowl and mix them up. They take 2 remedies and maybe they'll add the metal next, or maybe they'll add this. So it's very specific. So another thing that I want to say that's on where it says applications. So we see those are the applications that are written on the box. Now, I want to, once again, emphasize my book because I have a whole lot more information. For example, with UNDA 1, basically how I've laid it out is these are the indications, these are the organ systems, and not only that, but what I've done, I've written out specific indications, and I've written out what each of the herbs or the metal is most specific for. So my book, once again, I'll sort of do a self-advertising, hbbhealth.net. H for health, B for boy, health, the word health.net. On the right side, on the left side of the website, catalog, books, click on it, and what you're going to get is a full description of each of the remedies. So it's on the box that you see written there, but I guarantee you there's a lot more utilizations. This, as I said, is a liver remedy, 500 functions of the liver. Obviously, it goes way beyond just the GI. There's many other types of things that it's useful for, and we need to think about it on that particular level. So we have UNDA 13. And the other thing I will mention, and you'll also notice that the boxes are different colors. And that has to do a lot with the energetics of the remedies themselves, has to do with chakra colors, et cetera, so which is another whole energetic aspect that gets added. There's a specific reason that the remedies are in different colored boxes. UNDA 13 is a little bit more active or deeper, I'll say. It's a more severe type of thing. Somebody who, basically just want to do, some general lighter detoxification or depuration. UNDA 1 could be used for that. UNDA 13, however, may be used for somebody who has a more chronic liver inflammation, liver irritation, liver condition. There's also a relatively stronger kidney function, which means there's another thing that I should mention here, is that even though these remedies are being listed in this specific system, the reality is, from going back a few slides, if you look at those 2 overlapping triangles, 76 remedies, at some point or other, you can almost use any remedy for any organ systems. However, there are some that are much more specific. This one here, this is probably one of and will be one of the most common remedies. And so this is a remedy that I guarantee you that you'll never see a patient who won't benefit from taking UNDA number 20. And one of the most important things is when you look at that formula, aluminum, argentum, arsenicum, and aurum, 4 metals. It's the only remedy out of all 76 that has 4 metals. It gives you an idea of the depth with which this remedy can act, and basically it stimulates and supports 100% of every cell in your body. will have, because it has an action on virtually all vital structures, every organ from the big toe to the top of the brain, just because of that combination. It's an incredibly potent, powerful remedy. And if you're one thing for yourself, if you haven't tried UNDAnumbers, take UNDA1, take UNDA20, and take UNDA243, which we'll get to in a sec. UNDA74 is another liver digestive system remedy that is helpful and specific for the idea of portal congestion. So, if they're backing up, and we don't have to say they have end-stage liver disease or they have end-stage kidney disease, but if you have portal congestion for whatever reason, UNDA74 would be a remedy considered. UNDA226, the key thing, once again, I know it just says a few things on the left side of the slide, on slide 45, bloating, stomach pain, constipation, loss of appetite, and nausea. That's because that's what it says on the box. Obviously, Health Canada and the FDA says, well, you can't put every remedy, every use of this type of thing, which I totally agree with. But, as physicians, we know we can step back and think about the key note of this particular remedy. If a patient ever tells you that, after they eat, just a regular sized meal, they say, oh my God, it feels like I just ate Thanksgiving dinner, or it just feels like it's Christmas dinner, and it's like, oh, I got to go and take a nap. So this heaviness is just, it's like your digestive system is weighed down. That is a keynote and a really important aspect of the essence of this particular, of UNDA226. UNDA243, I've already mentioned, is the hepatic remedy par excellence. This is also a remedy that, somebody is feeling that, oh my gosh, whatever I did, I shouldn't have done that. There's I'll say a general toxicity. On rare occasions, we could say that, and you can use an UNDA, we call it a standalone. So if you're going out, for dinner with somebody or other, with friends, and, it's like, oh, man, it's like, I don't really do well in buffets, or I don't do well with such a wide variety of foods because of food sensitivities. A good idea would be to have UNDA243 along. Take a few drops before you start, middle of the meal, end of the meal, and you may find that what may have been a problem for you previously is not so big problem. UNDA1, UNDA20, UNDA243, not the only, and not saying you have to start with those, but are really important key remedies for people new to the whole idea of drainage, the whole idea of UNDAnumbers. UNDA258 is another deep-acting liver digestive remedy. The key thing to remember with UNDA258 is that, as you remember, it's for sort of complete secondary catabolism of toxins, pesticides. So if you're treating somebody for heavy metals, somebody for mold, somebody for exposure to X, Y, or Z, somebody who's taken a number of pharmaceuticals, somebody who is on pharmaceuticals and may or may not be on pharmaceuticals anymore. We know that pharmaceuticals don't just suddenly get metabolized and are out of your system in, a few hours. We know that some remedies can linger in the body for years and years and years, as per a hair analysis or a biopsy of tissue, et cetera. So UNDA258 is particularly important for a patient who at some point has been exposed to something that, we'll call it a xenobiotic, that is the body normally says, well, what's that? I don't know what that is. We have, you said last time, 11, 15 million chemicals in our biome, within our system. We know babies in the study had something like 258, interesting number, something like that, chemicals in their umbilical cord, that they basically tested. So UNDA258 is the keynote is, how do we get rid of these things that can't be completely catabolized? So perhaps if that's the case, we would do 120 and 258, or maybe we would do 13, 20, and 258. So we put all these systems together, into this very complicated but absolutely essential from a naturopathic perspective, we always say, health begins in the digestive system, which certainly it does. And we know that the, diet is about eating foods that are right for our body. Then the body has to secrete enzymes. Then it has to mix and do a peristaltic movement, and has to be able to facilitate the digestion. We have to absorb the nutrients we want, and we have to basically eliminate what the body no longer. And we need a very healthy digestive system in order for us to facilitate people to reach their optimal performance. Once again, I don't like the word wellness. I don't like, cure. We don't really cure anything, because I don't think we can cure anything. I think higher powers can cure things energetically, but we're not about cure. We're about reestablishing normal physiology, and we let the body do what it was naturally designed to do, because it's the most important computer, much better than Watson, even though they have Watson. Watson is only as good as the person who programmed it, and the person who programmed it doesn't have the ability of what the body has, to basically be able to create the balance in our system. So we have this, complicated system, highly interacted. Of course, no system is unique. That's why I'm not a fan of specialists per se. You don't walk to the cardiologist because you just have a heart problem. You have a problem everywhere, or a gastro or a rheumatologist. We have to look at everything. Those doctors, of course, are highly skilled. They're very good at what they do. They can certainly help us, but we still step back, 30,000-foot view, and say, what organ systems are we really looking at that we need to support to facilitate all these other organ systems to get rid of, the waste products and the metabolites and, that we basically are exposed to. So here's another set of remedies on slide 54 that basically shows the systemic complexes that are related to the digestive system. So I'll say number 4 first. Number 4 is everything, any issue growing from your lips, including any dental issue or oral cavity issue, down through the esophagus to the pyloric sphincter. So everything above the pyloric sphincter is number 4. That's sort of the keynote. And everything after the pyloric sphincter, any type of an issue, basically is 3. The only exception to that is ulcers. If you have duodenal ulcers, which means they're below the pyloric sphincter, we use 4, but everything else below so any issue, if any patient that's anything that you think is below the pyloric sphincter, wise it's 3. If it's anything above the pyloric sphincter, including the one exception, duodenal ulcers, it's number 4. But then number 6 is for holding on, it's for congestion. We typically look at it as constipation. I don't use it that much because the reality is that's 3 function, because that's where the constipation typically is. So, but the exception is a hoarder, a pack rat, somebody who never throws anything away, including their poop. That would be a great indication for 6. Remember, 6 is we're not just talking physical areas. So if somebody has it emotionally congested, they can't let go of something. I'm sure as you have, I've had a number of people who are divorced. One spouse is incredibly bitter about the other, and that type of thing, just can't let it go. That's a great indication for number 6, even though it seems like, that should be a nervous system remedy, which we'll talk about in the future. 17 is sort of a digestive skin, and it's an eczema type problem when you have food allergies. 24, another favorite. It's not just digestive. 24 is any patient where you perceive that something about their nervous system creates, whether it's a headache, whether it's irritable bowel, whether it's heart palpitations, whether they start coughing, whether they have pain, can't sleep, doesn't matter. If you perceive that their specific symptom has a nervous system related, that's your keynote for 24. 26 is a remedy for oral cavity. 31 is a small remedy for ulcers, whether they're in the mouth or in the GI tract. 34, we'll mention in a sec, is basically the male endocrine system for the adrenal. We mentioned 74. 210 is a modification of 24, some overlap there. 226 we talked about is heavy. 243 we talked about. 295, the keynote of 295 is really thyroid issues or imbalance in the hormone system and digestive issues. So if their main issue with thyroid is GI, whether it's constipation or other, 295 would be the remedy that you would end up considering. 39 is for any type of dysbiosis, parasites, or whatever. 43 and 46 are for usually upper GI stuff. 50 is the colon remedy. So under 3, as we said, once again, you see the remedies. This one has 2 metals that are in it. All these remedies that are listed on here relate to GI problems, but don't think that you can only use it for a GI problem, because the remedies have a much broader brush that we can use. But the way it's being presented, that's why in my textbook, basically we see there's many more uses of these types of remedies. The other one I'll mention with UNDA4. UNDA4 is basically, it's the inability, in addition to GI stuff above the pyloric sphincter, on the emotional level, it's the people who have the inability to tolerate what's going on around them. I mean, we have, we'll talk about climate change right now. We have outspoken people. We have people who don't believe it's an issue. We have people who said this is going to, by 2050, it's going to be a real problem in general. So people who have trouble digesting what's around them, maybe it's at work. Maybe they're really stressed at work. Why are you stressed at work? You have a nice job. I don't like my colleagues at work. They have trouble dealing with that. That's not, so in other words, they have problems digesting the outside world. UNDA4 is the other indication for that. UNDA6 we talked about is the pack rat, not letting go, congestion, that type of thing. UNDA17, it's not just a kid's remedy, food sensitivities, food allergies, and then they come up with their elbows and that type of thing that are problematic. UNDA24, once again, it's a favorite. This is one of the remedies you want to get UNDA24, because you're going to find at least half, if not 3/4 of your patients will benefit from this remedy, because so many of our patient complaints come in because of something related to their nervous system, whether it's sympathetic dominance or whether they have anxiety or insomnia or depression or whatever you want to label it as. Once again, we're not treating diseases, we're treating organ systems. We're trying to treat the nervous system where there's a physical manifestation. There's only, you see this one has APHIS in it. It's one of the few that has not just a plant and a metal in it per se. It's mostly oral cavity, so anybody who has persistent dental disease, so UNDA4 because it's an organ remedy, UNDA26 would be the second remedy in that group. This remedy is GERD, but probably most important, if somebody goes on the 4-drug therapy for ulcers, treated peptic ulcers, duodenal ulcers with great success. Usually you'll get relief within 24 hours. Once again, if it's acute, 6 times a day, 5 drops. So obviously we're using UNDA4 and UNDA31, and of course there's always a third remedy that's go along with it. UNDA34 is we have many remedies to support the adrenal gland. We call it the male hormone remedy. There isn't a corresponding organ remedy. Then between 1 and 13, there's an UNDAnumber10 for females, but there's no corresponding male. But in this case, it's UNDA34. So adrenal is a big one that we think about. 39 is the whole idea, instead of dysbiosis, very common in many of our patient population, for what's going on. 43 is reflux, GERD, poor digestion, bloating feeling, and 46 is somewhat similar. There's more appetite disruption with 46 probably than 43. I probably use 43, 9 times out of 10 versus 46. And really severe GERD, we use 4, 43, and 46, and I've used that on some occasions. UNDA 50 is everything like UNDA 3 below the pyloric sphincter. This is a great common, another remedy. You want to get this one because you're going to use it in half your patients. This UNDA 3 and UNDA 50, probably two of the most common remedies you'll give kids. Remember, their digestive system is not formed. From the baby who has colic to food allergies, food sensitivities, loose stool, skin stuff, 3 and 50 is a great combo. 74 we mentioned for portal tension. 210 is you see anxiety and irritability, which suggests, oh, we could use this for irritable bowel of some type. Yep, we could use it for SIBO. Yep. We can use it for, so there's a huge nervous system component in here. I mentioned 226, the keynote is the heaviness. Just feels like you ate this meal, and it's like, oh my God, is it ever going to digest? What can we say about 243? Remedy par excellence. 295, as I mentioned, is if you have thyroid issues and GI issues, 295, 5 drops 3 times a day, along with your other remedies. So here we see a combination of remedies for general immune and gastrointestinal support. I mentioned 3 and 50. Probably they're among, without any doubt, the most common remedies that I've used in children. I don't use them for on and on, but as a starting point, because, you know, their liver is not that toxic. They're not been exposed to lots of things. But we see number 20 because what that does, it initiates liver support and liver function. And the liver, you may or may not know, doesn't fully mature of all its multiple functions until 3 to 4 years of age. So it's a really important remedy. And then we have Imugen to basically, because as I said, within a child, especially, or what's going on right now in the world with the coronavirus, it's definitely an issue. So here we have a case of a 36-year-old who has, you know, this impaired GI function, hyperacidity and indigestion, a lot of heaviness and regurg for the last, for some time. It's worse heavy meals. If he eats too late, which of course is not a good idea. He's sensitive to certain foods. He's vegetarian. He liked spicy and sweet food a lot. He's not very thirsty. Stool perspiration and sleep were okay. His physique was normal. Mentally, he's anxious, sad, short-tempered, quite emotional, very upsetting with small things. Mental status was predominantly related to. So in other words, you know, you get a sense, oh, I'm getting a sense of what remedy I want to use. You see, his vitals are pretty good. Bowel sounds 4 quadrants and no tenderness. And so, you know, what did we do? In addition to the basic protocol guidelines, the BTGs, which I mentioned last time, is part of every patient recommendation, and these are explained obviously to people. So in this particular case, in addition to that, the probiotic specifically was under 50, HMF, not under 50, under HMF intensive 50, and then the minerals I used in this case were the trace mineral complex, CWS. And in addition to that, glutamine, morning and night, and then we did 4, upper GI above the pyloric sphincter, 24, obvious because of the fact of there's an emotional component, and then 43 because it's above the GI, or we could have used because of the heaviness after meals, 226. I don't use 4 in rare cases and very serious diseases I may, but 3 is the standard. You see in this case, I didn't, so if I used 226, I would have used 1 from each of the 3 categories, but in this case, I used 24 and 43. And then CalmGen, which is the phytogen, to just sort of calm down the entire nervous system. If we look at the renal and urinary systems, here's an other organ system. We know that, the kidney, we think of the kidney as basically just eliminated water waste, but of course it has many more functions than that. It has a hemopoietic through erythropoietin functions. It controls lots of different things. There's many key functions for maintaining proper body fluids, etc., producing urine, but also releasing these hormones. So we see that it approximately filters 200 quarts of blood. to process about 2 quarts of waste products and extra water from our system. So in doing all these types of things, it's important that if it's working properly, that we hold on to our minerals and not pee them out. So it has, it's extremely essential, as once again, as every organ system is, in carrying on, getting a person back to this place of homeostasis, or preferably homeodynamic balance. So it regulates the blood composition, our blood pressure, produces hormones, has a regulation on blood sugar, and obviously the thing that most people are aware of, it's like what we pee out on a regular basis for what's going on. So this is the overview on slide 84 of the types of remedies. And so if you, with your evaluation, say the organ system that I want to focus my first set of remedies with, this is the slide that you would look at. These are the remedies that you would pick from for the most part. And when you're starting off, definitely. Without any doubt, the #1 remedy in this particular group is UNDANumber2, but I also want to emphasize that UNDANumber2 is not just renal. Please make a note, it's not just renal, it's all organ systems with the specific, because of how we're teaching it, related to the kidney. The other remedy that's probably the most important here is UNDA44, if we're specifically looking at the kidney, and we'll go over these in a little bit of detail, along with UNDA258. So we're trying to get things out of the body rapidly, 244, 258, but let's go over them a little more in detail. We already talked about UNDA1 and said, oh, it showed up in liver. Yep. Now it's showing up in kidney. Yep. And there is a huge overlap with all the UNDA numbers. It's, with very rare exceptions, and one of the 76 remedies is only used in one system. That's almost never the case. There's always multiple systems, so even though it doesn't necessarily list it on the box, or listed, what it says on the box, don't think that you're limited to those particular indications, because once again, we're not treating diseases, we're treating organ systems. And organ systems, there's a huge overlap for what's going on. Another, like some of the ones we said, like UNDANumber3, for example, UNDANumber2. UNDANumber2 is a remedy you have to have. If you treat anybody ever with any type of an acute problem, any acute problem, whether it's respiratory, sinus, sore throat, bowels, whatever, any acute problem, sprained ankle, this remedy is the first remedy in 100% of the cases. It does urinary tract. You always give UNDA2. Why? Because UNDA2 supports all emunctories. So whether it's in the chest, it'll help that. Whether it's in the colon, it'll help that. If it's on the skin, it'll help that. But if it's in musculoskeletal, it'll help that. It helps all emunctories. So incredibly important remedy to have. UNDA7 has a much narrower scope, more for probably the women, not that us guys don't treat urinary tract infections, but this is the remedy for urinary tract issues. You see the remedies that are in there, Reversi and Equisetum. So frequent urination, you have your triad of, pain and frequency with urination. So we have 2 remedies now for somebody with an acute UTI. If you do a, you do a UA analysis and say, yep, you got a urinary tract infection. You don't have to think beyond that. I don't get out a script pad because I don't use one. I pull out UNDANumber2. I pull out UNDANumber7. A couple other ones we'll get to. We give 5 drops 6 times a day because it's acute. I start the remedies right in the office, and in some cases, the first dose, they're already noticing a difference. It's pretty dramatic. UNDA15 is an elimination remedy. It's more for fever. So if they're having some acute issue related to fever, so we say it optimizes fever, we would do that. And it's not to lower, it's not like Tylenol. We're not trying to lower it, we're trying to optimize it. I'm a huge fan of fevers. I like people to get fevers because it's the best way, it's the best antimicrobial there is. UNDA23 is a small remedy, not used as commonly. Probably incontinence is the most common place where I use it. Enuresis, and I think the oldest person I've ever had was an 18 or 20-year-old who literally entire life had enuresis. That UNDA23 did a miraculous result for her. But it's, you know, we can use it for little kids who are 6 and are still wet the bed and they don't want to do sleepovers and that kind of thing because, you know, afraid of wetting their best friend's bed and that kind of stuff. So incontinence for older people, perhaps. It can also be used, and if somebody has chronic urinary tract issues and I don't want to use the more common remedy, I would stick UNDA23 in there. UNDA38, you look at it, we tend to think more it's a male remedy, male for male congestion, prostate specifically. However, I've given UNDA38 to women who have, you know, what is described the sepia state. Feels like their uterus is falling out, this heaviness in their lower pelvis. And if this is a chronic type of an issue, giving UNDA38 to a female works quite well. It's a remedy I really like, UNDA44. One of the more important remedies, and once again, I mentioned standalones. This is a great remedy for heavy metals. This remedy, and you know, it's like I don't do chelation personally. However, UNDA2, 7, and 44 are a great chelation therapy if you sort of go that way. It's also the remedy for UTIs, 2, 7, 44. Woman comes in, you do a urinalysis, you do a dipstick, you got what it is, 2, 7, 44, 5 drops 6 times a day. That's going to work faster than, believe me, a prescription would. That's been my experience for sure. 45 is similar to 44. I don't use it as often, maybe because I'm more in the habit of using 44, but it could be used for the same type of indication. UNDA48 is a deeper acting remedy. We said for some of the more chronic type issues, and the main reason is, as you see, this one has 3 metals, arsenicum, aurum, and plumbum. You see it's a gray box, just like UNDA20 is a gray box, deep acting remedies. So this one is, this would not be a remedy I would start with for people because this is like digging a really deep hole. And if you don't have your emunctories working half efficiently, UNDA48 may really stir them up, and you don't want them getting worse because, oh, I'm never going to use these things again because they don't understand the philosophy. However, once, as we talked about last time, that great question that was asked, how do you know? You know, just don't. I'm suggesting that would not be a first-time remedy. UNDA240 is sort of an additional, it's a detox remedy through the kidney. We'll say through the kidney urinary system. So there's sort of an overload in your system, and it's another remedy that helps hold on to minerals. So we'll often use it in patients like with osteoporosis. 258 we have talked about previously. 270 is typically used when there's issues on the outside. There is also an ointment, as it says. Literally, it's 270 ointment. That the base of it is eucerin, and so many times parents have been told by a dermatologist or a pediatrician to put eucerin on eczema or itchy, dry skin. And so instead of using a steroidal cream, UNDA270 may be one of your options. You can also take it internally as a support for that. This is also, UNDA270 is one of those remedies also that's good for all terrains. Doesn't matter what miasm a person is, but UNDA270, like UNDA2, it crosses a lot of barriers and is very effective for that aspect. A 26-year-old with some urinary issues. She's an African-American. For the last 4 weeks, urging, odor, burning sensation. Sounds like a pretty classic UTI. She had switched methods of birth control that she had been using a diaphragm for 5 or 6 weeks. This occurred because she had begun to have sporadic sexual relationships. She had tried drinking cranberry juice, but that's found as time went on it was getting worse. She'd only had one previous UTI several years ago that followed, and it followed a bout of severe diarrhea that was treated with antibiotics. So she was also diagnosed with high blood pressure and high cholesterol, you know, a few years ago. She has chronic knee and back pain as a result of injury from a car accident. She'd been smoking since 16. She'd always had difficulty sleeping. So, you know, yes, we're going to deal with the acute, but when you step back 30,000-foot view, you say, oh, we got lots of things that we're going to need to be able to support this person with, because there's a lot of underlying issues that are going on. You see, she takes several medications already as a 26-year-old, in addition to taking Allegra for allergies or even Benadryl. She takes a number of vitamins. You see her blood pressure at 130/90 is like, oh, it's a little high for a 26-year-old, and then even her pulse at 88. So it's like, this is not tending to a good thing. Yes, she has an acute infection that could easily account for that, her blood pressure being up. She had sensitivities and, you know, certainly a strong odor. Respiration was okay, but a dip showed that she indeed did have a urinary tract infection. So we used the classic remedy, 2-7-44, 5 drops 6 times a day. ZMAs is a gemotherapy, another par excellence for the urinary tract. Surprisingly, it's also good for the cardiovascular. It's great for people post-MI. Heather Young Shoot is a phytogen, a single phytogen, great for urinary tract issues. Nat Mur is a grounding remedy, probably the main tissue salt for urinary tract stuff. And then HMS, specifically cystogen, as a probiotic during that particular time. And we take the remedies 6 times a day. When we're starting to get better, we cut them back to 3 times a day. But you have to continue the remedies 2 days. This is always for any acute, 2 days past the resolution of all systems. So you can get these together. This is a great kit to have, we'll say, or formulas to have. 2-7-44. I've used that dozens and dozens of times. And people say, well, I did that and it didn't work. So, well, the unit numbers didn't work. I can guarantee you, if you give 2-7 and 44 and Heather and they don't work, you're actually managing the wrong organ system. The remedies work when it's the right organ system. You may think it's that. How many people, like with interstitial cystitis, think they have a urinary tract infection? They'll take 2-7 and 44 and said, that didn't do anything. Obviously, the problem is not a urinary tract infection. So if it doesn't, step back, reanalyze. Of course, if you haven't done a UA and if you've done over the phone, which is not my recommendation to do, you want to see that there is an infection there. As we know with IC, there's no infection there, but people will tell you that they have an infection because, oh, I've had this before, and they may have been given antibiotics before. Well, hey, it got better, but it's got better in time. So it's an important consideration, and that goes for any system that basically we're treating. If you feel that you're in the right organ system, but the remedies are not producing the effect that you would expect, step back, reanalyze, look at your organ systems, look at that slide that shows the overlap of the organs and how they interact with each other, and say maybe my issue with my choices are really not the right organ system, and that's an important consideration of what it is that that we want to do. So if we, the last group we'll talk about this evening are the respiratory remedies, as we know, from the nose cavity through our lungs. The lungs have obviously a critical component to life because it's important for O2 and CO2 gas exchange, where we're getting, basically it affects the pH of our blood. We have angiotensin converting enzyme. You know, it also supports, you know, what's happening around the heart. So slide 106 shows the key remedy. So if you've made your determination, whatever the issue is that somebody is having, and the problem is in the respiratory system, this would be this would be the box that you would look at to try and confirm. The main respiratory remedy, organ remedy, is UNDA-5. 14, 15, 16 is that second group of remedies that, you know, I don't talk about as much, not in this workshop anyway. The functional remedies, the main functional remedy is 27 because it's an acute remedy. 32 and 35 is bronchoconstriction, lots of tightness in the chest. 37 is an infection remedy, if you like. And if you ever said to yourself, this person would benefit, potentially could benefit from an antibiotic because of an infection, 37 would be the one to consider. 220 it goes along with 32 and 35 for bronchoconstriction. 312 is up in the throat, and 710 is sinus stuff. The par excellence, why is it UNDA 5 called UNDA 5? 5 lobes of the lung, that's why it's called UNDA 5. So the important thing to remember with UNDA 5, in addition to respiratory things, is how we communicate with the outside world. So if people have a communication issue, you know, they're holding it in, you can call it congestion if you like, but they can't really speak their mind, whether it's with their boss or their spouse or their best friend, and they're afraid to say something. They, you know, literally on an emotional level, we'll call it communication. UNDA 5 is a great remedy for that. It's truly our how we communicate with the environment. You know, we give CO2 to the environment. What does it do through photosynthesis? It gives us back 21% oxygen in the atmosphere, which unfortunately may decrease, especially with the whole thing in the Amazon that's happening. 20% of all the air is made in the Amazon, which is a phenomenal statistic when we think about it, per se. So UNDA 5, obviously, we have many this time of year, just like I had last time. You know, this urinary tract, not urinary, upper respiratory infection. What's the remedies? We already know UNDA 2, because we're using all acute things. UNDA 5, UNDA 2, UNDA 5, 6 times a day for any type of upper respiratory problem. 14 is a deeper acting remedy. Don't use it in acute type things. It's used more for long-term, deep-acting chronic stuff. People who have been smokers for a long time, people who have food allergies and perhaps have had asthma or bronchoconstriction or pneumoconiosis or, you know, all that kind of stuff. It's a very deep-acting remedy, mainly because, once again, you have C3 metals, argentum, aurum, and cuprum. And any time you see more than 2 metals, you know that it's a deep-acting remedy. That's sort of the clue, because it has multiple. It's not just respiratory. This is any area of deep acting. UNDA 14 is beneficial for. We mentioned 15 are to make fevers efficient, we'll say. UNDA 16 is both respiratory, but there's a huge hormonal component associated with this one, and that's because when you talk about organ development, when you talk about immune system development, we know that when the immune system is not capable of keeping ahead of it like it is in a kid, what happens? You start to recruit the endocrine system. So this is a huge, and there's a respiratory endocrine component that's associated with that one. Gray box tells you that, oh, this is a deeper acting remedy, even though there's only 1 metal in it, aluminum. So this is people, once again, long-standing respiratory issues from whatever, the long-term smoker, et cetera, that this would be a remedy certainly to consider. 27 is acute. So this is, you see antimonium, I said, is for immune. So now we have, so if somebody has an acute flu, 2, 5, 27, 5 drops, 6 times a day. 32 is for spasm. We tend to think of it as a cough remedy, and it is, you know, if it's, you know, spasms within the chest. But I also have used 32 for spasms any organ system. It could be a Charlie horse. It could be a spasm within the colon. So it's not, even though it's a blue box, it's not just for respiratory, and even though it's a so irritated throat. So 32 is very beneficial on that particular level. 35, different colored box. It's like red. Oh, is that cardiovascular? Which, you know, and to some degree it is. Cardiac asthma, if you like. This is not uncommonly an asthma remedy. Somebody who has a lot of bronchoconstriction, whether it's environmental or, you know, asthma that follows a flu or cold, or, you know, we always said that one of the best treatments for asthma in kids anyway is a parentectomy because of the emotional aspect. Obviously, allergies play another huge role, so 35 becomes useful in that. 37 is not unique, even though it's a blue box, to infections just within the respiratory tree. It's any organ system where potentially there's viral, bacterial, the so-called It's the UNDA antibiotic, but it is not an antibiotic. I repeat, it is not an antibiotic. It is not necessarily a substitute either for an antibiotic. I would not suggest that. However, when you're familiar and you're comfortable with UNDA numbers, believe me, I have used this on numerous occasions instead of having to write a script for somebody. This is the drainage remedy for, once again, this bronchoconstriction, tightness for whatever reason that people will experience. That helps to relax the chronic coughs from, some underlying chronic condition. 312 is more of a throat remedy, sore throat. So if somebody has tonsillitis or pharyngitis, so-called strep throat, you have a great number of remedies you can mix and match that work really well. Make sure 5 drops 6 times a day. In addition, of course, we're doing hydrotherapy, we do warming socks, we do heating compress on the throat, you can do probiotic gargle, saltwater gargle, all your usual stuff that you would do for that. But what we use for, a strep throat, for example, 2, 5, maybe 37, and 312. So we may use 4 remedies in some acute situations. Dose it until 2 days past total resolution of all symptoms. I have to say that with UNDA numbers, the easiest things to treat are acutes because you have the remedies. Once you know the remedies, the prescription is that quick. Probably it'll take you less than 5 seconds to know. All you need to know the organ systems. You get to know the remedies, and we got it. This is a 710 is blue box. We tend to think about sinuses, tend to think about it with tonsils. The keynote of 710, closed space. It's in anywhere things can't get out. An abscess on a tooth, you're not going to cure it. You're not going to cure anything, of course, with UNDA numbers. But it's not going to cure an abscess, but it will buy you some time until the person can get to the dentist. The bigger way that I use UNDA 710 are people who are emotionally locked. They're stuck. They can't let their emotions go. They have a hard time crying. They have a hard time getting angry or upset appropriately. So this is a deep-acting remedy. I've given it to many people who then spend the first couple of weeks after taking it wondering why they cry all the time. They cry all day. They break down. It opens Pandora's box in some cases. So it's not a bad idea to tell somebody if you're going to give them this. That won't happen if it's acute, but if you're dealing with a chronic situation, that's when you'll start to see that on that particular level. At least that's what I typically have seen. So this is a person who's been taking Claritin to manage seasonal allergies. They're, not painful, bilateral thin discharge from the nose and sneezing, et cetera. So no nosebleeds, no loss of smell, pretty okay vital signs. So what did we do? Our BTGs, of course, vitamin C and the scorbutate, the flavonoids because it's an allergy to try and stabilize the membranes, and because it's been ongoing, 5 because it's always there, 27, as I said, it's sort of the acute, 14 is a deeper acting remedy because of the fact it's been going on for some time, per se. And viburnum lantana is a gemotherapy, 3/4 of a teaspoon, a couple of times a day. Algen is specifically the phytogen for allergies. So it's an acute chronic type remedy to buy time. But more importantly is, okay, now you got to come back and we got to figure out why you have the allergies. So we're buying time to do this type of prescription. But more importantly, as you all know, allergies are really not respiratory issues or sinus issue. They go back to what your liver is doing. Your liver is not properly processing this. When you look at the old remedies from forever ago, they always dealt with how do we support liver function. And so if somebody has allergies, any age, liver is where your underlying problem is going to stem from. But their liver enzymes are going to be normal. There's nothing wrong with it. Nobody can find a problem. But remember, we're talking energetic. That's the stem of the problem. And I'll just make mention of the nebulizer, which, you can do neti pots, you can do nasal lavage and all that, which I still recommend because people can do it at home. but much more often, in my patient population anyway, is I recommend nebulizers. And that comes from doing thermography on people and seeing that, maybe because of my practice, but I would say 3 out of 4 people don't even know that they have chronic sinus congestion. And most of the time it's not bacterial. Most of the time it's fungal. And so they've taken, especially people with lots of sinusitis, they've taken antibiotics many times. They still get these sinus infections. Maybe they need 3 courses for each course of that. By then it's fungal. So, I used to do just neti-pots and things. However, for whatever reason, years ago, I started using a nebulizer, which, of course, people have typically used for asthma. So we put some saline in the nebulizer, and it was a patient who actually suggested to me, why don't you put UNDAnumbers in there and nebulize it right into the sinus, which is what we do. So 5 mils of some saline in the nebulizer along with 10 drops of, and it's not always 1, 2, and 7, 10. It's, if I haven't used the UNDA5 as part of the case, I may put UNDA5. There's a huge mix and match that I use in the nebulizer, depending on what we're trying to deal with. Sometimes I'll use fungicide in there if it's more of a fungal or a mold type of an issue. So the hope this evening is to basically give you an idea that what we're doing is we're managing organ systems, we're mixing and matching. There isn't a specific remedy only for each system because they all overlap. But the key thing is, how do we keep supporting the different organ systems? This is a reminder that we're going to be continuing in a couple of weeks. And this is also a reminder, once again, as was said earlier, of Dr. Plummer. If you haven't heard Dr. Plummer, you got to go. If you're up in Canada, in Ottawa, or Barrie, or Calgary, you got to go up and hear him. And then the other one, of course, is in Toronto. So we have a few minutes. So we will ask Denise, who I'm sure she's been collecting questions and that type of thing, which were just awesome last time. So, Denise, what do we got to try and share with people if there's any questions out there?
We got lots of questions for you today.
Okay.
They're a little bit all over the place, so I'm just going to start and we'll see what we can get through today.
Very good.
Back to your last slide on your last case, the last slide on page 123 or slide 123, you have BTGS at the very top. I have a practitioner asking, could you tell us what that stands for again?
Once again, that's basic treatment guidelines, basic treatment protocols. It's what I showed you with the one case where we talked about that last time. Go back to session 1. It talks about getting outside, talks about having fun, getting in sun, going to bed on time, having a real routine, then you look at the diet, etc. So that's what I give every single patient. I think it was the first case tonight. Go back and look at the treatment protocol, and it's all listed out there, all the things we do every time with ongoing, not acute. I don't worry about it in an acute patient. I've just seen them. But for all patients, any type of an ongoing chronic illness, they all are shown and talked about the basic types of things, which we talked about, and which once again, back to the last session, showed you the triangle that's unique to all 7 billion people on this planet that we all need to do. We need to breathe, we need to drink water, we need to eat healthy food, we need to get out, we need to move, etc. That's BTGs.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So another question is, can we mix UNDA remedies from different organ systems for a protocol?
You can mix different UNDAnumbers from different organ systems. However, my suggestion is if you're somewhat experienced with UNDAnumbers, yes. If you're new to UNDAnumbers, I would not recommend that because you'll have a very difficult time learning the essence of what the remedies will do. And what I mean by that is, after you have been using the UNDAnumbers with your patients for some time, let's say, since I have this slide up, UNDA5, you're going to start to hear the patients tell you a story. They'll start to say, oh, it's interesting, without you prompting, they'll say, I'm getting along better with people, or I have less trouble, and it's like, well, that's not why I gave it to you. But you'll start to get a sense of what the essence of the remedy is, and if you start mixing different organ systems until you're familiar with the remedies, you'll have a little bit more difficult time to be able to discern what is the broad expanse of these remedies. And just, you know, being 76 remedies, and we're using 3 remedies with the prescriptions, what it gives you is about 450,000 possible combinations of remedies, which is why 76 remedies are such a broad scope for treating literally any and all organ systems. That's why this system is absolutely amazing.
Wonderful, thank you. Let's go into some metals for us. With UNDA numbers, with metals, how would this affect someone with heavy metal or mineral imbalance?
Well, this is one of the main reasons that we use UNDA numbers, is because what it does, because it's basically supporting the intra and extracellular milieu, and I have cases of people who were considering chelation and for whatever reason didn't do it, and I didn't technically treat their heavy metals other than with UNDA numbers, and then we have before and after, you know, the period of time, and all their heavy metals dropped. And I said, but I didn't treat heavy metals. All we did is facilitate in the intra and extracellular matrix by supporting a Monk-tree function, and so that's one of the main reasons we would use UNDA numbers, because that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to optimize that intra and extracellular space. Now, as far as minerals are concerned, it's not going to imbalance minerals, unlike IV chelation will, which takes a whole bunch of stuff out, and then you got to go back the next day and put some stuff in. You know, that's not how UNDA numbers work, because UNDA numbers are physiologic. The body has the ability to know, no, I'm not going to demineralize the bones and try to, you know, get a mineral, steal it from, which is your best reservoir of minerals in your body. But it's also a reason, especially when we're looking at kidney issues, why we're using the trace mineral complex, or perhaps we're going to use the multi-min colloidals if we want to get a little bit higher dosage. But, you know, the trace mineral complex, CWS, the cold water solution, are great ways to, on a physiologic level, people say, well, it's the dosage. Remember, we're talking physiology here. We don't need, you know, 500 milligrams of something when a physiologic dose is much tinier.
Perfect, thank you. The next question from a practitioner is, are UNDA numbers safe in pregnancy and breastfeeding without concern of draining toxic matter into the baby?
So I'm sure the company liability will say no, you can't use them. So this is my personal opinion of the many patients who I have had who are pregnant. And with Dr. Gano's blessings, he said, what UNDA numbers do is they make a person have a higher level of optimal performance, a higher level of wellness. I would not specifically give remedies that say, oh yeah, we're going to do heavy metal detox per se during pregnancy, but I use UNDA numbers literally throughout the entire 9 months of pregnancy. And even Dr. Gano, who, you know, way back in his lectures, he had specific ideas of how we prepare a woman for pregnancy, and then what we do once they are pregnant. So I have I would say very successfully used UNDA numbers. This is my personal opinion. This is not the position of the company, because for liability reasons, they're going to say, don't use them. I'm going to tell you, with many prescriptions and many pregnant women, so for me anyway, I may not be for the practitioner, but for me, I have no issue using UNDA numbers in pregnancy.
Thank you, Dr. Tom. The next question is, what is the effect of electromagnetic fields on the UNDA potencies and also on traveling with UNDA numbers?
It's a great question, and that was a question way back when, you know, because remember, one of the times I went there was just after 9/11, and of course, UNDA figured it out. They basically put the UNDA numbers through X-ray machines constantly. And what they found is that, you know, unless you're a businessman or woman who basically gets on an airplane every day, and, you know, and it's constantly, your job is traveling from city to city, they said, and I don't remember the number, but they said if you're going on vacation and you put it through an X-ray machine and come home a week or two later, it actually does not affect the Kirlian photography, and that's the beauty of their analysis. However, they said if you continually expose it to electromagnetic radiation, it will alter the energetic imprint. As far as traveling with them, it's absolutely not a problem. Remember, the remedies are only supposed to last 3 weeks, so unless you're on an airplane 15 or 20 times, because it's your everyday job, or if you're an airline hostess, whatever, on airplanes, probably it's not going to work for them because that's their job, unfortunately. So for those people, that's probably not the first choice of remedies. But otherwise, when they've done all the studies on that, and it shows. I mean, I saw the pictures. I really feel quite fortunate to have been a witness to looking at pictures and looking at pre and post and multiple X-ray exposures, et cetera, to that type of thing. But they're incredibly stable, which is a great thing about it, which is why the remedy from the 1950s, it still looks like, the remedy made in 2020.
Perfect. Thank you so much. The next question from a practitioner is, some patients are concerned when they see arsenic 12X on the UNDA bottles. What would you say to them?
That has come up in my situation also. And so that comes down to what we call the art of medicine and the interaction that you have with people. So whatever your description of what homeopathy is and however you talk about energetic medicine, sometimes I'll say very little. I'll say these remedies have been around, and in fact, if you eat rice grown in the United States, the reality is there's a lot of root vegetables that we eat that have higher levels of arsenic. In fact, we know that arsenic is an important component in our body because it has a role to play in multiple systems. And so these remedies have been used with incredible safety factors for over 100 years and will continue to be used on an ongoing basis. And many patients similar to yourself who've had these issues, who have used this remedy, have reported nothing but great success.
Thanks, Dr. Tom. The next participant question is, are there certain UNDA remedies that you would avoid with children?
With rare exception, I wouldn't use many of the remedies that come in a gray box. Remedies that have lead and like UNDA-48, UNDA-19, they're deeper acting and generally, with the exception of some really chronically ill, perhaps some genetic issues in children, you don't need remedies that are that deep acting because the simple, a lot of UNDA-3, UNDA-50, UNDA-5, UNDA-2, our UNDA-22, UNDA-24, UNDA-243. I mean, they're deep acting, but they're lighter, and for children, they will have proven effectiveness. So, in fact, many of the, we're not going to be able to talk about all 76 remedies in any great detail. And I won't say I've never used, like UNDA-48 in a child, but that's a special situation. It's not a remedy I would tend to think about because it's like taking a shovel, putting it in too deep in the ground, and then you can't get it out of the ground, and it really stirs thing up. But the UNDA numbers otherwise, I started using UNDA numbers literally from the get-go. So I just mentioned the baby I just saw this week, with a urinary respiratory infection. They work so well. It's like they respond. Babies respond so quickly. So for the long answer of a short is, yes, there are some remedies that are too deep acting that I would be cautious unless you're very familiar with what the remedy is capable of doing. But pretty much every remedy, with perhaps the exception of 19 and 48 that I can think of at the moment we talked about tonight, would not be choices for children.
Wonderful. Thank you. The next question is a little long, so I'm going to try and narrow it down for you. Okay. What would you recommend for someone who has anxiety that is specific to a particular circumstance? One, for someone that it just happened, the circumstance just happened, and then someone who can't get over a circumstance that happened a long time ago. Would these be the same remedies?
Yes, they would be the same remedies, but the remedies where it happened a long time ago is going to take a lot longer to manage than the patient that, that something just happened. Let's say their daughter or their child was in an accident and they can't sleep and they're all hyped up. But once again, we have other great remedies. We have CalmGen, we have TraumaGen. We have other ways that support that. In addition, we haven't talked about the nervous system remedies yet. That will come. We'll talk about a lot more in detail about those types of things, but, just throwing it out there as a way to think about it. So somebody, depending on what their specific anxiety symptom is, whether it's heart palpitations, so we consider cardiovascular remedies. If it's a panic attack, they have weight on their chest. If it's respiratory, if they can't sleep, would be a different remedy. But, in that case, the main remedy for nervous system is UNDA9. UNDA22, which actually is, we will mention, is a great kids remedy. In fact, I mentioned 3 and 50. When we get the nervous system, you'll see 3, 22, and 50 is probably the most common trio of remedies that I give to children. Anticipatory anxiety, the kids who don't want to separate from their parents, they go to school and they got all freaked out and, they have all kinds of issues. 3, 22, and 50, amazing combination in that type of a scenario, generally speaking. Somebody who has chronic anxiety from a long time ago, I can guarantee you it sounds like it's nervous system, but you have to look farther back, and many times in that case, I actually have found it's something that happened either in utero or before they were 2 or 3, so I end up treating their kidney because that's really the source of the issue. So in that case, it would not be nervous system remedies, it would be more kidney remedies, because if you look at the triangles, they overlap, and it's not just, in the 2 separate triangles. You have to go across. So CNS and kidney are greatly related because, the nervous system in Chinese is the sky, and the kidney is the root, and it pulls us back to the earth, generally. And anxiety often is you can't get out of your head, so you got to pull that energy down back into the earth, down into the roots. And very often, those nervous system issues are treated with kidney remedies versus an acute anxiety remedy, but generally there is a huge overlap. But that would take a more in-depth history and specifics about the case.
Great answers. Thank you, Dr. Tom. I'm going to go with 2 more questions for tonight, but I've written down all the other questions so we can get to them perhaps next time, or we'll have medical advisors maybe talk specifically to practitioners who can't get to questions tonight. So the next 2 questions, the first one is, what are the reactions that you can see if a primary emunctories are overloaded?
Probably the most common is headaches. Things trying to get out. We could say rashes, but that's not most common. There's a congestion within the system, and how the body quickly starts to tell people. In fact, the first 50 people that I gave the numbers to, because I didn't pay them enough attention to their emunctories, they invariably would come back and say, man, I feel terrible. Maybe their GI is upset, maybe they're more nauseous, maybe they've lost their appetite, but it sure was common to congest their head, and headache was, and they said, I don't usually get headaches, but I have a headache. And we know we're not talking migraines, we're just talking like a bogginess, brain fog, they're sluggish, they seem to, not be able to function as efficiently. On rare occasions, yes, they may get a rash, but that would have to be pretty quick, because what I found when I started doing this is that reaction happens pretty quick. In fact, I don't remember if I told this story last time, but my resident, way back when, it's a long time ago, would usually come, so we'd prescribe them, the patient would get the remedies, and then on day 4, they'd call the resident and say, I feel terrible. What's going on with these things? I feel just awful. I'm fatigued, I'm sluggy, I have a headache. And it's like that's when I really started to understand the importance of how the primary emunctories need to have some degree of efficiency, and we can't overload their system until that happens. So that's when I paid more attention to castor oil packs, dry skin brushing, and breathing, and getting out in the air, and meditating, and all those types of things that are all part of the BTG.
Thank you so much. Last question for you, and it's a doozy, so this is going to be maybe a long one, maybe not. For patients, this is a multiple question from a lot of people. So when you have patients with dysfunction in multiple systems, how exactly do you prioritize this? Where do you start, and how do you know how long to keep them on before you change them up to the next system?
That is the million-dollar question. That's a great question to end with, too. So if a patient comes in and you look at their intake form and you see that they have 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 concerns, chief complaints, you know that all their organ systems are congested, every one of them. Now, they can tell they have palpitations, they get headaches, they can't sleep, they're constipated, they get, heaviness in their chest. It's like, oh my God, I don't know where, they're fatigued, of course. You say, where do I start? So when somebody has multiple organ systems that they tell you about, they just don't come in and say, oh, I have premenstrual symptoms, or I have dysmenorrhea, or whatever it is they tell you. That's pretty specific. Now, dysmenorrhea, just as a side note, doesn't mean, oh, I should give them pelvic remedies. Because then you have to back up and say, well, what's dysmenorrhea from? That's an inability to handle hormones. Oh, let's go back to the liver because the liver is so important. So normally speaking, the more congested the person is, the less aggressive you are, but those are absolutely the patients where you start with the basic remedies, 1, 20, 243, or 2, 20, 243. And if you're really concerned, be cautious. Don't give them 5 drops 3 times a day. Tell them to take 1 drop 3 times a day. See how they do for a week. Doing great. Okay, take 2 drops 5 times a day. So those, in that case, the bottles will last longer than 21 days. So instead of seeing them in 4 weeks, I'll tell them I'll see them in 6 or 7 weeks because the bottles are going to last that long. Generally, if you're aware of that type of thing, you'll mitigate a lot of these issues, and of course all their other symptoms aren't immediately going to go away. But you need to start the ball rolling, and what I don't want to do, which I did for too many patients, is these aggravated, and then you have to back off, wind it down, let their symptoms sort of negate itself, and then start over. So I learned from experience of which patient to say that to. Now, that doesn't, and that's, believe me, that's a small percentage of people. Like, you say, oh yeah, but many of my patients have all these different organ systems. But, this comes down to your history. This comes down to, and I think I said last time, I always say to the patient, what's your priority and what are you willing to do? So they may say, whether it's a female, I say, well, it's my hair loss. Well, we know hair loss is not because it's a hair problem. We know that's an underlying problem. So then it comes down to you to say, okay, which system is it? Is it her nervous system? Because you always ask about what their bowels are, and you do breathing, and what's your frequent urination, how much water do you drink? I mean, we do, you're asking these questions, not just ask these questions, you're asking these questions. You learn to take a history on how their emunctories function and what some of their past history was. What was your childhood like? So we get a bit of a sense that, that all the dominoes fall down in order, in the correct order that they're supposed to. So, it sounds like, oh my God, all my patients have all these chronic illnesses and I'm going to aggravate everybody. But, having done this for so many years with so many people, it's even now, even with some of the sickest people, it's for me, it's rare that because the main reason is because the basic treatment guidelines, or the BTGs, have the ability to do a lot of work of just getting the emunctory starting to work. And if you feel comfortable that the patient is on board with that, and they will drink more water, and they will go to bed on time, and they'll get some sunshine, etc., you can be pretty assured that the body, oh my God, finally, this is what I've been wanting for some period of time. In that case, if you're new to this, go with the basic. Go do the 120, 243, or 220, 243, or if they've had a lot of medications and that, you may even consider 258 in that case. It's not as scary as, you know, I may have either laid out or you may be perceiving. You know, if you haven't used the numbers, I really encourage you to try them on yourself. Doesn't matter what your health issues are, just take 120 and 243 and see what happens. You may be surprised and said, wow, and if you get a headache, you say, wow, I'm not as, my emotions are not as efficient as I thought they were, for example. So, it's, it's obviously we don't need to take every remedy, but, you know, if you're new to the numbers, taking these remedies, and I can't tell you how many thousands of bottles of Window numbers I've used in the last 25 years, because, you know, I have taken all 76 remedies, sometimes just experimenting with them, to sort of see how they make me feel and what they do, because that's part of how I learned what the remedies actually did, even if I wasn't necessarily treating a chief complaint for what's going on. So hopefully that helps the practitioner, and if it's not clear enough, then she can ask it again, he or he can ask it again next time, and we'll try and do a better explanation. But I want you to buy some of the remedies, use them, try them on yourself, get going with them, and you're going to really get much more benefit out of the rest of the 5 sessions we'll be doing over the next weeks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tom. Thank you for an excellent webinar, and thanks all to you that participated this evening. I also thank everybody for allowing us to go a little over tonight to answer these great questions. If you have any additional questions, please contact your Atrium Innovations representatives, and do not forget to take advantage of the 15% off and free shipping using promo code UNDA20 for all of our UNDA number compounds, valid until June 8th, and this code can be used up to 4 times. I encourage you to start integrating the valuable information and clinical pearls that you've gained right away in your practice. Please note that the recording of this webinar will be available on Soroil website beginning next Wednesday, February 26th until June 8th. And Session 1 is already there for you if you'd like to listen in. Again, to Session 1, it is under education and complimentary recordings. You can find Session 1. Session 2 will be available next Wednesday, February 26th, and available for both of them until June 8th. Everyone registered for this evening's event can expect to receive an email with instructions on how to access the recording for next week. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night. Thanks, Dr. Tom.
All right, everybody. I'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, your conference has now ended. All callers are asked to hang up their lines at this time, and thank you for joining today's call.